It's such a pleasure to be with so many shining, wonderful faces of friends, old and new here. It's such a wonderful time of year where it just seems like all of that spiritual stuff is just so readily accessible. For those of you who were here during purification, Shama just literally took the baby Jesus with us up into the fire ceremony. It's like that's how accessible things feel. Which is why I love this reading, Living the Presence of God. Swami, it's interesting, in the sort of a companion book, Rays of the Same Light, titles it Practicing the Presence of God. Is there a difference between practicing and living that presence? I'm not quite sure. Whenever I hear the word practicing, what comes to mind is the phrase that probably everybody in the entire world is familiar with or has heard in multiple forms: practice makes perfect. There's another phrase that I heard, I don't know when, 10, 15 years ago. I think it's fallen a little bit out of favor because it's been a little debunked on the scientific side, but it's the concept that to master a skill, you have to practice it and do it 10,000 hours. The original person who came up with that was studying professional violinists. They had more than just ticking the boxes, the number of hours that they were rehearsing. They were obviously, the quality of their rehearsals went into that. When I think of that, I think of Todd, who is a masterful pianist, keyboardist. We got to hear him with last Sunday in our Christmas concert. We get to hear him quite often here. I'm sure he put 10,000 hours into the piano playing while he was still a teenager. I don't know, I'm just sort of guessing there. But it's a fascinating thought. Now, I don't have any of those kinds of skills. I took piano when I was very young. Maybe I got 200 or 300 hours. I don't know. Nowhere near mastering that. But as I was thinking about that, I thought, well, one thing I did do when in my younger years, pretty much all of us have done, is put at least 10,000, probably multiple tens of thousands of hours into developing the mind. Going to school, the culture, my parents, everybody celebrated all the successes that one receives and gets by using the mind. And that's how I went out into the world, using my mind. And wasn't always the smartest person, but I had some successes there. But gradually, I realized I'm not really getting anywhere with those successes. And this is when, purely coincidentally, of course, we started doing things like meditating and yoga and things like that, and other things started dawning on me. I can still remember one of the first times I had a very powerful meditative experience. This is long before we were a part of Ananda. I've mentioned this before to some of you, but I was in LAX at the end of a very long business trip, flying home with a really, really bad headache. Somehow it came to me, well, practice that one meditation technique. Within maybe a minute and a half, gone. What that really did for me is it gave me a tangible experience of the value of meditating, and it got me to keep meditating. I wasn't looking for God. I wasn't trying to live in the presence of God at that point. I still was in that track of successful things, of the mind in particular. But it got me to keep meditating, as I said. In later years, after we had been a part of Ananda to some degree, I think I was still new. I wasn't yet a Kriyaban, but I heard, we took a class with Jyotish and Devi on the Bhagavad Gita, and I heard them say something that, I've said before, which is, if you think you're going to think your way to God, have another thought. And that has stuck with me almost every day of my life since then. I mean, that was well over 20 years ago. Because the idea of thinking my way through things is just such a powerful habit. But I heard it then. Now, obviously, I had done things to help develop the heart since then, but that really turned a corner for me because I really wanted to accentuate those heart feelings. So every time we chanted, every time we prayed, every time I meditated, I really concentrated on what am I feeling? How can I feel those more subtle things? And that's what happens for most of us as we go along the spiritual path, as we become more attuned to those more subtle things. So this is where the practicing or the 10,000 hours applied to a spiritual kind of thing, it kind of breaks down a little bit. But then as I was thinking about this reading, I was watching a video from Swami Ananda, who lives up near Nevada City, on this very passage from the autobiography of a yogi, of the chanting people that the young Yogananda came across. As Ananda said, that chanting was bad. It was not good. It was not the chanting that we have here almost every Sunday and many times in between, the kirtan that we had on Friday night, which is so uplifting and just draws us in. This chanting was, okay, A for effort, but the results, yeah, not so much. But as Lahiri Mahashaya pointed out to young Mukunda, it's not the results that matter. The results are the things that we measure with our mind. They had God in their hearts. That's what they were singing to. That's what we want to aspire to when we're chanting here. Yes, it's beautiful chanting, and there's the temptation to, let me just listen to these beautiful voices, this beautiful music. But it's intended to invoke, let me call to God. Let me open my heart and get out of the mind of, well, how inspiring is this particular chant? Who knows whether those men chanting there had practiced 10,000 hours of purposely sounding bad, purposely being devotional? Maybe they were brand new. This is where the 10,000 hours can break down, because if we're chanting purely, with our pure heart to God, we can have 0 hours of practice and be successful. But what happens along the way as we do practice, as I said, we get attuned to these more subtler and subtler things. I realized shortly after that class, I don't know how long, that with Devi and Jyotish, that I had a karmic pattern in my life that, well, still exists today. I'm still battling it, which is trying to earn love. I don't know what was going on with my mom, but there was just a recognition there that I was trying to earn her love, which of course I rarely felt, and that's part of why I was born into that particular family, I'm sure, to feel that. And then she passed, and then shortly after that, my dad passed, and I thought, oh, good, I'm done with that. No. As I said, I'm still dealing with that karma. It just transferred to somewhere else in the material realm here. But not too long, we had been here, living here in Ananda, Palo Alto for a little while, and I can't remember the exact timing of things. I think I might have just started working here in the Sangha, and I realized that desire for that love I was trying to earn was really the desire for divine love, to seek it from the masters, to seek it from God. Now that might seem obvious, but somehow it didn't enter my consciousness until at that point in time. But ever since then, every time I'm able to catch myself, I can remind, James, you're just trying to seek divine love. Just trying to feel that divine love. God is, of course, always loving us. I'm just get my own stuff in the way and can't always feel it. And what's the best way to feel God's love? Give love. And this is what happens. This is exactly what Lahiri Mahashaya was talking about to those people who were chanting. Giving God our love by chanting his name. By taking part in anything that we can do to awaken that divine love and accentuate it within our heart. Service is a great part of that. And this is something, again, that's alluded to in these readings. But things can start to get subtler and subtler as we progress. So as we're practicing the presence of God, we're not trying to tick the box of the 10,000 hours. We're trying to attune ourselves to those more subtler and subtler things. The realizations of, okay, I'm not trying to earn love. I'm trying to feel God's love. And sometimes that's what the practice is. That's the difference between practicing the presence of God and living the presence of God. Because, of course, God exists everywhere, in everyone, in everything. But I have to remember to look for it, remember to feel for that love. Sometimes it's helpful to get those sort of inputs from other people. It's sort of akin to, how am I doing? How far along am I going on the spiritual path? What sort of progress am I making? Swami said, I'm going to have to paraphrase because I don't remember exactly, but if you're going to measure how you're doing on the spiritual progress, and I don't recommend you do it in the span of years. Get the feedback from others who are observing you to see, how are you doing? And I've had a great blessing of people to tell me they really can feel my heart. But I had a circumstance recently with a friend who, it's been beautiful to watch their progress here at Ananda as they've been going through the discipleship, the classes, taking Kriya, Sadhaka vows. And recently, they were at a Thanksgiving feast with friends that they had been doing for decades, the same group of people getting together every year for Thanksgiving. And so everything was known in that regard. And this friend came back afterwards and they said, I know what to expect, but there was just something that was a little bothersome about it. The people weren't any different, I'm sure. They were exactly the way they have been, the way they said things, the way they acted, their consciousness. But my friend was in a different place. She was in a different place where she could feel God's love. And the things that were sort of anti to that just became a little jarring. Many of us have experienced that, but sometimes we need somebody to help point that out to us. Now, does that mean that we shouldn't do those things in the outside world? No, it doesn't mean that at all. I still have a mind. I still use my thinking powers, but I do it devotionally. One of the things that Yogananda said at this time of year to especially pay attention to is Christ consciousness. As we celebrate the birth of the baby Jesus, who brought Christ consciousness, we can celebrate by looking for that emerging Christ consciousness in every one of us, in ourselves as individuals. But more importantly, when we look for it in others, then we can see it reflected back within ourselves, because sometimes it's hardest to see within the self. And that's the opportunity this time of season. That's where the veil between what's happening with God and here in the material realm, those subtleties get thinner and more accessible. When we can look for that Christ consciousness, when we're out and about, when we're in the craft fair, when we're in the 8-hour meditation that's coming up next Saturday, when we're at some party that can be very festive, but there can also still be Christ consciousness. When maybe we're finishing projects up at whatever the job is, whatever the work is, there is still Christ consciousness in there. Looking for it as we serve, yes, we're going to help others, we're going to be kind, but we're serving that Christ consciousness that is within others. This is the opportunity now for all of us to practice living the presence of God. Blessings.
Let's take a moment of silence. We'll have some music now.
second.